we are unpacking the evolution of electronic music and specifically focusing on this highly controversial, really explosive rise of a genre known as melodic techno.
Yeah, it's quite a story.
It really is. And we've got our hands on this remarkably candid internal industry document. It was produced by 786 Music Publishing LLC.
Right, out of Miami.
Exactly. They're this fascinating entity, and they basically operate under one very direct guiding principle, which is just the vibe is the only rule.
I love that. It's so simple.
Right. So our mission today is to figure out how a music genre that was fundamentally rooted in like this cold, emotionless anonymity transformed into a massive, emotionally resonant mainstream phenomenon.
And you know what that ultimately tells you about how culture evolves in general.
Yeah, exactly. To kind of help you understand the scale of this transformation, I want you to picture a building, like a massive, towering, brutalist concrete structure.
Wow, good visual.
Right. It's stark, it's functional, gray, completely devoid of any decoration. It was built for one specific purpose, and it does that purpose incredibly well. That building essentially is traditional techno music.
It is, yeah. It's a very imposing image for a genre that has honestly always prided itself on being imposing.
Exactly.
And what we're going to see in the 76 music documentation is exactly what happens when someone decides to walk up to that brutalist concrete fortress and just install these vibrant, towering, deeply emotional stained glass windows right into the side of it.
Which completely changes the building.
Completely. They alter the structural integrity and obviously the public perception of the building in the process.
Yeah.
And look, whether you are an electronic dance music fanatic who spends weekends in warehouses or, you've literally never stepped foot in a club in your life, you need to pay attention to this mechanism. Because we are essentially analyzing a masterclass in how you successfully break the sacred foundational rules of an established industry to create something entirely new. You basically force the world to catch up to you.
Yeah, and to understand why adding these stained glass windows, right, this melody and emotion to techno was such a seismic event, we kind of have to establish the baseline of the concrete building first.
Right, the foundation.
Exactly. Now, for anyone following electronic music, the historical context of traditional techno isn't a secret, but the 786 music document actually quantifies the psychology behind it, which I thought was fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. The numbers are wild.
Right. They point out that prior to 2015, less than 5% of top charting techno tracks featured a major chord progression.
Wow.
Yeah. So the genre wasn't just incidentally dark, it was like actively engineered to suppress emotion.
Yeah. The document actually uses the phrase deliberate emotional starvation.
Emotional starvation. That is so intense.
It is. But that was the philosophy. It was born in post-industrial cities, like Detroit. And it was all about surrendering the individual ego to this mechanical, repetitive rhythm.
No room for the self.
Right. The DJ is literally hidden in the shadows. There was no spotlight. There's no microphone. Definitely no personality cult.
Just the music.
Just a relentless physical pulse of the track. It's supposed to be this cold exercise in endurance. The machine is the focus, not the human.
So into this pitch black, emotionless environment walks melodic techno.
Right.
And according to the source material, the creators of this new subgenre basically looked at that landscape and asked a very dangerous question.
Always the start of trouble.
Always. They asked, what if we kept all the aggressive power of this music, but we added a soul?
Yeah, and soul being the exact terminology 786 music uses to describe the shift, which I think is very telling.
Yeah, it really is.
Because they didn't slow the tempo down, right?
Yeah.
They didn't initially change the underground venues either.
Right, they kept the setting.
Exactly. They maintained that driving, aggressive momentum of the traditional techno beat, but they layered in these sweeping, cinematic, deeply melancholic chord progressions.
Right, over the top of it.
Yeah. They introduced universally recognizable human emotion into a space that was explicitly designed to exclude it.
And the reaction from the underground scene was, it was a literal civil war.
Oh, totally chaos.
The 786 music files state the underground, quote, lost its mind in both directions. Purists who were guarding the subculture treated this like an act of vandalism.
Well, because the psychology of purism relies entirely on barriers to entry, right?
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Like that darkness, that stark inaccessibility of traditional techno, it acts as a filter. If you understand and appreciate the cold, repetitive machine music, well, then you have earned your way into the in-group.
Oh, it's like a badge of honor.
Exactly. So when producers suddenly make that music accessible by adding these recognizable emotional hooks, The purists feel like their sanctuary has been violated.
The barrier to entry is just gone. But, I have to play devil's advocate for those purists for a second.
Sure, go for it.
If traditional techno was intentionally designed to suppress emotion, wasn't adding soul to it fundamentally destroying what made it techno in the first place?
That's the big question.
Right. Like, if you put a stained glass window in a nuclear bunker, did you innovate or did you just ruin a perfectly good bunker?
That is a great way to put it.
It just feels like we are blurring the line between actual musical innovation and, I don't know, a hostile takeover by producers who just wanted to make the genre radio-friendly.
Yeah, and the tension you were describing right there, that is the central conflict the source material highlights.
Really?
Yeah. The traditionalists argue exactly that a functional art form was compromised purely for palatability.
Right.
But the side driving the evolution, they argue that an art form that refuses to mutate eventually hits a creative wall and just dies.
Evolve or die.
Right. The rigid, emotionless structure can only iterate on itself so many times before it just becomes a parody of itself. True innovation in any field usually requires this kind of collision of opposing ideas.
But this raises a mechanical question for me, because you can't just accidentally drop a delicate piano melody onto a 130 BPM techno track, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely not.
It sounds like a train wreck if you do that. Someone had to actually invent the audio parameters to make this work, which is exactly what the 786 music files detail next.
Right. The structural change didn't just happen by accident.
No, not at all.
It was heavily engineered.
Yeah.
And the architects highlighted in the blueprint are the artists Tale of Us and Anyma, and specifically the record label they built, Afterlife Records.
Afterlife, yeah.
The 76 music document is very clear that Afterlife didn't just, sign artists and release tracks.
Right.
They codified the sound. Before Afterlife, producers experimenting with melodies over techno beats, they were scattered.
Yeah.
It was just this fragmented experiment.
Just individuals trying things out.
Right. But Afterlife institutionalized it.
They wrote the manual.
Yes.
It actually reminds me a lot of the tech industry. Like, Apple didn't invent the MP3 player, and they definitely didn't invent the smartphone, but they codified the ecosystem.
That's a really good comparison.
Right. You didn't just buy a phone, you bought into this sleek, minimalist universe. But Apple is a product ecosystem. Afterlife is a record label.
Huh.
So how do you actually codify an aesthetic language for a sound you can't even hold in your hand?
Well, you basically give the audio a physical, visual manifestation that is just impossible to ignore.
Okay.
Afterlife created this deeply immersive brand. The document details how their aesthetic language involved highly specific stage design, bespoke visual art. Like, they have this signature upside-down falling man logo,
Right.
and a unified way their artists actually presented themselves.
It's a whole package.
Exactly. They took the visual language of high-end emotional cinema and they synced it perfectly to the techno beat. It ceased to be just, a DJ in a dark room. It became a curated visual universe.
But was that aesthetic language just armor to survive the underground civil war?
What do you mean?
Like, if it had just been the music alone, released anonymously on white label vinyl, like old school techno, wouldn't it have been just crushed by the backlash? It seems like they needed that massive visual branding to demand to be taken seriously.
Oh, absolutely. The visual ecosystem forced the industry to view it as a movement rather than just some passing gimmick of, quote, soft techno.
Right, right.
The unified front gave the fans something tangible to hold onto and identify with, while the purists were, attacking the sonic choices on message boards.
Giving them a banner to rally under.
Exactly. It gave the soul of the music a physical shape, turning a controversial sound into a tribal identity.
Okay, so we know who built the blueprint, right? And we know the aesthetic armor protecting it. Now we really need to zoom into the molecular level.
Let's do it.
I want to go into the studio and look at the production DNA, as this source calls it, because the actual mechanics of the music explain the cultural phenomenon.
It really does.
The 786 music files define the core of melodic techno as a deliberate, engineered tension between techno's hard structure and these melodic harmonic layers.
And tension is the operative word there.
Yeah.
Because in traditional techno, tension is actually pretty minimal.
Yeah.
Because every single element serves the same master, which is the rhythm.
Right, the beat.
Right. The bass, the drums, the percussion, they all push in the exact same direction to create physical momentum. But melodic techno introduces a conflicting force.
So the hard structure provides the physical momentum, making your body want to move.
Yes.
While the harmonic layers deliver the emotional hook, making your brain feel something entirely different.
Exactly. And the human brain responds so powerfully to that specific type of cognitive dissonance.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Think about it. Your body is receiving an aggressive, relentless mechanical signal from the low-end drums.
Okay.
But your brain is receiving this vulnerable, human, melancholic signal from the high-end melody.
Oh.
The space between those two signals, that friction, is literally what makes the listener feel euphoric.
Structurally, balancing that seems like a nightmare, though.
Oh, it is.
Because you have the aggressive, concrete foundation of techno and the delicate stained glass of the melody. Like, to move away from the building analogy for a second, it's less like building on a jackhammer and more like managing high-speed traffic.
I like that.
Right, so the kick drum is a massive semi-truck taking up the left lane, and you have to force these delicate melodies to strictly drive in the right lane.
Right.
And if they cross lines, you just get a muddy sonic car crash. So how do they actually engineer this so the track doesn't collapse into a confusing mess?
Well, that traffic management is exactly what separates the pioneers from the imitators. And it comes down to a few highly specific audio engineering techniques that the document outlines.
Okay.
One of the primary tools is something called sidechain compression.
Okay, you're going to have to explain how that works for someone who has, never opened music production software in their life.
Of course. So, imagine the track has to breathe.
Okay.
Sidechain compression is basically a technique where you link the volume of that delicate melody directly to the impact of the heavy kick drum.
Oh, they're connected.
Yes. Every single time that massive semi-truck kick drum hits, the software automatically ducks the volume of the melody for just a fraction of a millisecond.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The melody gets out of the way just long enough for the drum to punch through, and then it instantly swells back up.
That's brilliant.
Right. The track literally inhales the melody so the kick drum can exhale. It creates this massive pumping sensation that glues the aggressive rhythm and the soft emotion together.
So they aren't actually fighting for the exact same space at the exact same time.
Exactly. They are sharing the space sequentially, literally millisecond by millisecond.
Wow.
And furthermore, they use this aggressive equalization, or EQing.
What does that do?
Well, if you've ever been at a festival and felt that physical rumble rattling your chest, that is the low-end frequency spectrum.
Right, the bass.
Right. That is premium real estate in dance music.
Mm-hmm.
Producers like Tale of Us figured out how to surgically cut all the low frequencies out of their emotional melodies.
Oh, interesting.
So they forced the melancholy synths to float entirely in the higher frequency real estate, completely separated from the bass. The booming low end never physically touches the delicate melody.
They just share the same audio file without ever crashing into each other.
Exactly.
Like a molecular tightrope walk.
It really is.
Because if the melody is too loud or takes up too much frequency real estate, the track loses its underground physical power and just becomes a pop song, right?
Yep.
But if the hard structure is too dominant, the melody just gets buried and you are right back to emotionless machine music.
Exactly.
Perfecting that tightrope walk is what made the sound so undeniably infectious. Which actually brings us to the mainstream verdict.
Right.
Because a sound engineered that perfectly in the studio with that much emotional resonance and that much visual branding, it was never going to stay in a 500-person dark room in Berlin.
No, absolutely not. The climax of this entire evolution is the mainstream arrival.
Yeah.
And the 786 music document points to one incredibly specific defining moment for this genre, which is Anyma's performance at the Sphere in Las Vegas.
Ah, the Sphere. I mean, the Sphere is the ultimate rejection of the traditional techno ethos.
Totally.
We are talking about the absolute antithesis of an anonymous warehouse. It is literally a multi-billion-dollar glowing orb in the middle of the desert with a 16K resolution wraparound LED screen.
It's massive.
It is the pinnacle of global, highly capitalized visual spectacle.
It really is. And the source material frames this not just as a successful concert, right?
Yeah.
But as the definitive resolution to that underground civil war we talked about.
The war is over.
Yes. The document notes the brutal math of cultural shifts. It says, quote, "The people buying tickets and streaming tracks have already decided who won that argument."
And public voted with their wallets.
Exactly. The purists can argue on message boards in perpetuity about what constitutes authentic techno.
Sure.
But when an artist from a controversial subgenre sells out a venue like the Sphere, requiring millions of dollars in visual production budgets, the debate is functionally over.
Yeah.
The culture and the economy of the culture has moved on. The soul won the market share.
It is basically a massive public graduation day for the genre.
Definitely.
But, when a subculture achieves that level of mainstream arrival, when it goes from a secret underground rebellion to a giant glowing billboard in Las Vegas backed by massive corporate infrastructure, does that actually validate the genre's evolution?
That's the million-dollar question.
Or does it prove the underground purists right? Does it prove that ultimately this genre just traded its gritty authenticity for mass appeal and a massive paycheck?
Well, the paradox of underground music is that the ultimate reward for being truly innovative is that you eventually become the mainstream establishment.
So true.
So did they evolve or did they sell out?
Looking objectively at the data in the 76 Music file, the answer is really a complex mix of both.
They absolutely traded the exclusive, gritty authenticity of the underground for mass appeal. I mean, you cannot be a secret club when you are broadcasting to 15,000 people inside a giant LED dome.
Obviously not.
But to claim that invalidates the evolution, well, that ignores the reality of what was actually achieved.
Right.
Because they took a rigid, unyielding musical structure. They engineered a way to inject deep human emotion into it without breaking it. And they built an aesthetic language so powerful it resonated with millions of people who previously despised techno.
That's huge.
It is a monumental artistic and logistical achievement. So the purists are entirely correct that the old world is dead.
Yeah.
But the innovators are correct that the new world they built is spectacular.
I think that's perfectly stated. So let's recap this journey, because the mechanics of this shift apply far beyond just music.
Oh, absolutely.
We started in a world defined by deliberate, emotionless anonymity, the brutalist concrete building. Then we watched an underground civil war erupt, just because a few visionaries decided to install stained glass and add a soul.
Yeah.
We examined how Afterlife Records provided the blueprint and the aesthetic armor to survive that initial backlash.
A visual language.
Exactly. Then we went into the studio to look at the traffic management of sidechain compression and EQing that balanced that hard structure with the emotional melody.
The molecular tightrope walk.
Right. And finally, we watched this genre take a massive mainstream victory lap at the Sphere, letting the global market basically declare a winner.
It is a complete narrative arc of disruption.
It really is.
And the reason this matters to you, the listener, even if you never intend to listen to a single melodic techno track in your life, is because of the underlying mechanics.
Yeah, the framework.
Look at your own industry, your own field of work, or even your own personal projects. Every field has its rigid, hard structures, the way things have always been done, the unwritten rules guarded by the purists of your profession.
You just have to find your own concrete building.
Exactly. True breakthroughs, the kind that change a paradigm entirely, they almost always require you to identify those rigid structures and actually have the courage to inject your own emotion, your own unique human perspective into them.
Right.
Because the friction between the established structure and your new emotional resonance, that is where the innovation actually happens.
Wow.
You have to be willing to master that tension, build the aesthetic language to defend your idea, and just weather the inevitable civil war until the wider audience realizes you were right all along.
It is a seriously powerful blueprint for innovation.
It is.
But, it leaves me with one final kind of lingering thought for you to mull over.
What's that?
Well, culture is never static, right?
Right.
We've seen how adding emotion and soul to techno propelled it out of the underground and into these massive multi-billion-dollar mainstream spectacles. It basically became the new establishment.
Right, the new normal.
Yeah. And what happens when a sound or an idea becomes the massive, unavoidable mainstream establishment? The next generation inevitably rebels against it.
They always do.
Always. So will the next wave of underground electronic artists look at the highly produced emotional spectacle of the Sphere and decide to just strip all the emotion away all over again?
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. Are we just watching an endless pendulum swing of culture? Do we eventually smash the stained glass windows just to appreciate the cold, dark, brutalist concrete all over again? It's definitely something to think about the next time you hear a new sound breaking all the rules.